Mr. Liu, welcome to what some in the press have described as the Grand Cayman Upland House rehab and restoration. And the Grand Caymans, they're very joyous about this hearing.
Woodard credits you with originating the plan for sequestration. Was he right or wrong?
Well, Senator, it's a little more complicated than that, and even in his account, it was a little more complicated than that.
I hate to speed it up. Did you make the suggestion?
Well, what I did was said that with all other options, with all consequence, it would be so unacceptable to everyone that we'd be able to get action.
So is it unfair that the president says the blame is on House Republicans?
Well, I think
that they originated is what he said.
Senator, the demand for an enforcement mechanism was not something that the administration was pushing at that moment, and the only alternative that anyone could think of that could be agreed to was sequestration.
Do you regret suggesting sequestration? No,
nobody could imagine it.
I heard your testimony today that it shouldn't take effect. Do you regret suggesting sequestration?
Well, Senator, it's a little more complicated than that.
November 21st, 2011. Let me quote the president. Already some in Congress are trying to undo these automatic spending cuts. My message is simple. No. I'll veto any effort to get rid of these automatic spending cuts to domestic and defense spending. There will be no easy off-ramps on what's changed. What's
policies that make sense to get our fiscal house in order. That is consistent with what he said last night. It's consistent with what I believed, and not going into sequestration.
Do you regret suggesting sequestration?
You know, Senator, I look back at a time when that was not an acceptable option, and I think that it should not have been the case that the good faith and credit of the United States was at issue, but that was what was at issue, and I think we had a solution that frankly should still work. Sequestration is so objectionable that we ought to just do our work and solve the problem.
Jack, in the Armed Services hearing last week, Secretary Panetta testified that following his and General Dempsey's 5 o'clock meeting on September the 11th after the Benghazi attack, they had no further contact with the White House, and it was their understanding that you, as Chief of Staff, were the individual briefing the President. Is that accurate?
The National Security Staff was, well, Senator, I did speak with the President that evening. The National Security Staff was working on the issue on a nonstop basis.
But who was actually briefing the President?
The National Security Staff was.
Were you?
I was not. I was in the room when the President was briefed, but I was not.
Okay, because John Brennan testified yesterday that it wasn't him. Secretary Panetta said it wasn't him. In hearings, the ODNI Clapper said it wasn't him. Acting DCI Mike Morrell said it wasn't him. Ambassador Kennedy said it wasn't him, and the FBI said it wasn't them. Now, we've eliminated a lot of people who had contacts within the intelligence community that knew firsthand what was going on in Benghazi. Let me ask you again, who briefed the President on actually what was happening throughout this 7-hour period?
Well, in the conversations that I was in, the National Security Staff was present, and some of the people...
Would John Brennan have been included in that?
And the National Security Staff was present. You're asking who did a briefing, and that's different from who was in a conversation. I think if you ask people, were they in conversations, there might have been a different answer.
Who was your primary point of contact in the intelligence community?
And the National Security Staff was present. As Chief of Staff, I didn't usually reach out directly to the intelligence community. I worked through the National Security Staff.
Was there anybody from the intelligence community in that briefing session on a continual basis to your knowledge?
The intelligence community was in close touch with the White House, with the National Security team on a near constant basis.
Last question. If the Affordable Care Act is the panacea some suggest it is, why did the executive branch exclude themselves from coverage under the Affordable Care Act?
Senator,
Congress is included, staff's included, members are included, but nobody in the executive branch is included under the Affordable Care Act.
Senator, that is actually a provision. I was not involved in the creation. I'd have to go back and check. But
you think they should be?
Well, if there's I assume it has something to do with the fact that if there's the federal system is something that is going to be accessible in a sense through if there's a federal exchange. But I'd go back and check and get back to you. I don't want.
In fact, my understanding is every member of Congress and every staff who works for a member of Congress is under the state exchange program. They're no longer part of FEHVP. My point is simple. If it's that good, why would we not make all branches?
Yeah, Senator, it's a detail that I'm just not familiar with. I have to go back and check and get back to you.
We'll get back to you. That's the song I hear from an awful lot of people in the regulatory business. We'll get back.